They say some towns hold secrets you don't want to uncover. And Lyra had no idea that when she crossed into this one, she was stepping into a world that would test her heart, her courage, and the very limits of who she thought she was. The air felt different here, heavier, darker. Every shadow seemed to whisper, every alley a memory of something dangerous. And above all of it, the name floated like a ghost on the wind. Zyric. Zyric. The name alone carried weight, a presence so fierce that it seemed to make the night itself shiver. They called him the Zombie Alpha King, a ruler whose power was whispered about in fearful tones, a man who could command obedience and terror with equal ease. People didn't just avoid him, they revered him, trembling at the very idea that he could notice them. Lyra's heart raced as she walked through the cobbled streets, her steps careful, yet drawn inexorably toward the center of the town where she knew Zyric held court. There was a pull, subtle at first, almost magnetic. A part of her mind screamed to turn back, to run toward the comfort of familiarity, but another part, something stubborn and fierce inside her, urged her forward. She had always been curious, always been brave in ways she hadn't yet fully realized. Rumors followed her like shadows. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. He sees you the moment you step into his realm, and he knows what you hide before you even speak it. She tried to push the words away, tried to tell herself they were exaggerations, stories told to scare outsiders. But still, a shiver ran down her spine every time she passed a darkened doorway or a whispered conversation seemed to pause as she walked by. And then she saw him. Zyric. It wasn't just the height, the commanding presence, or the air of danger that seemed to radiate from him. It was something else, something deeper, a quiet, unsettling intensity that made her pulse skip and her breath catch. He wasn't moving toward her, not yet, and yet it felt as though all movement in the town had slowed, as though time itself was bending around him. His eyes, dark, piercing, and unrelenting, found her in the crowd, and the world narrowed until nothing existed except the space between them. He felt it then, a flicker of fear, yes, but something else too. A strange recognition, as though some part of her had always known him would find her. But alongside that recognition came confusion. Was it danger she sensed or something far more complicated? She tried to steady herself, to remind herself that he was a king of chaos, a ruler feared by all. But the way he looked at her, it was almost obsessive. Not cruel, not angry, not possessive in the way she expected, but curious, calculating, and magnetic. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to flee, to protect herself. And yet she couldn't. As she passed the crowded square, she noticed the subtle signs of caution in the people around her. Eyes darted toward her and then to him. Whispers erupted in hushed tones. The rival factions always watching, always waiting. They were like predators circling prey, their attention barely masked by polite smiles and casual glances. Lyra's stomach tightened. She wasn't safe, not yet. Perhaps she never would be. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to walk with purpose. Her pulse thumped in her ears as she tried to focus on the mundane. The uneven cobblestones beneath her boots, the lantern light reflecting off the damp stone, the distant howl of a wind that carried more than just cold. But the moment her gaze flicked back to him, he was closer, or maybe it was just that the space between them felt smaller. Every instinct told her she was being watched, not just by him but by forces she couldn't see. And then she noticed the subtle obsession, the way his attention lingered longer than politeness should allow. He didn't speak to her yet, didn't move, but there was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm that could rip everything apart. She tried to tell herself she imagined it, that he was just another powerful alpha, used to people staring in awe. But the truth was undeniable. There was something between them, something unspoken yet impossible to ignore. The town itself seemed to shift around her. Lanterns flickered as if reacting to his presence. Shadows stretched longer, pooling at the edges of alleyways. Even the rival factions seemed to hesitate, as though sensing that this encounter, however fleeting, was significant. Lyra felt a thrill and a chill at once. Danger. Desire. Destiny. She couldn't separate them, couldn't tell which would dominate, but she knew deep down that her life had changed the instant she stepped into his gaze. The servants and townsfolk whispered, carefully avoiding him but not ignoring her. One servant in particular, quiet and attentive, seemed to move in the periphery of her vision. Eyes that were supposed to be mundane followed her, tracking her every motion. There was an intelligence there, a patient waiting, and though it offered no comfort, it heightened her unease. Something told her that this silent observer knew more than they should, and that in this town, secrets were as dangerous as swords. Lyra's fingers brushed against the small amulet she wore, a token from her past, and she felt a warmth there, a connection, a reminder of who she was, even as the world pressed in with uncertainty. Her heart beat faster. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet her curiosity, her fascination, her almost irrational pull toward Zyric refused to let her step away. And then the first move came, not from her, not even from the servant, but from him. A subtle step, almost imperceptible, that closed the distance just enough to make her aware of his presence without the need for words. It was an assertion of power, but not aggression. Yes. A claim, though silent and unseen. She felt it ripple through her chest, a mix of fear and intrigue, as though the very air between them had become charged with possibility and danger. The night deepened. The wind whispered secrets only she seemed to hear. Shadows played along the edges of the square, hinting at enemies, rivals, and the inevitability of conflict. And through it all, Zyric watched, patient and deliberate, drawing her attention despite herself. She wanted to flee, wanted to vanish into the safety of anonymity, but the invisible thread tethering them was strong. Too strong. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo the tension inside her. The servant's gaze never left her, steady and unwavering, and Lyra felt the prickling sensation of being observed by forces far greater than herself. The townsfolk held their breath, metaphorically and perhaps literally, sensing that tonight would be different. That tonight a storm was brewing, not just in the air but in hearts, in destinies, in the fragile balance between love and danger. And Lyra knew with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated her, that this was only the beginning. That something in her life, in her very soul, was about to be tested, stretched, and forever changed by forces she could barely comprehend. Zyric was more than a man, more than a ruler, more than the whispered fear of a kingdom. He was a force of nature, silent yet overwhelming, and she was now caught in the orbit of his presence. Every instinct, every heartbeat, every flicker of silver that ran through her veins warned her to turn, to escape, to protect herself. But every instinct also whispered, "Stay. Watch. Learn. Feel." And as the first night of their inevitable collision stretched on, Lyra realized the cruel truth. The town was alive, the enemies were watching, and her heart was already ensnared. She could run, she could resist, she could deny it. But fate, power, and perhaps something far older than either of them had other plans. If you love intense werewolf romance stories that make your heart race and leave you desperate for the next chapter, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections for more dark romance, fated mates, and emotionally gripping supernatural stories that stay with you long after the story ends. The days that followed were like walking through a world painted in shadows and whispers. Lyra had crossed the threshold into Zyric's realm, and nothing felt ordinary anymore. The town, once seemingly quiet and mundane, revealed its undercurrent of secrets, undead sentries lurking in corners, servants who moved with unnatural precision, and whispers that carried warnings she couldn't yet decipher. Every street corner seemed to hold a story, and every glance felt like a test. She learned quickly that this was a world ruled by rules older than memory. Politics weren't just whispers, they were survival. Power wasn't just displayed, it was enforced, often violently. And in the center of it all, Zyric moved like a shadow, calm, deliberate, observing everything, missing nothing. He didn't need to speak to assert control. His presence alone was enough to silence the room, to command obedience and fear in equal measure. It was in those quiet, dangerous moments that she first realized just how dangerous her new life could be. The first attack came without warning. A rogue pack, shadows that moved like smoke, struck in the dead of night. Lyra barely had time to react as teeth and claws threatened, the air ripped with snarls. And yet there he was. Zyric appeared as though conjured by instinct, moving with a speed and precision that made her heart both soar and ache. He shielded her, his hand brushing hers with just enough contact to send sparks of heat through her veins, and in that moment she understood the obsession she had only glimpsed before wasn't casual, it was absolute. Yet fascination carried a weight. Every protective gesture, every intense gaze, left her questioning herself. Could she trust him? Was he a savior, or another threat in a world that had already betrayed her so many times? She watched him carefully, noting the way his eyes lingered on her even when no one else could see, the subtle tightening of his jaw when danger loomed, the possessive curl of his hand around a guardrail as if claiming a space. There was power, yes, but there was something more. A dangerous curiosity, a hunger that both thrilled and terrified her. And then there was Celine. She moved like a shadow across the edges of Lyra's life, a rival whose beauty was sharp, whose envy cut deeper than any blade. Celine didn't hide her intentions. She made them obvious, subtle, and cruel. Every glance was a challenge. Every word a weapon. Lyra could feel the tension coil between them, twisting tighter with each encounter. And yet it was Zyric's reaction that unsettled her most. His eyes, sharp and protective, would track Celine's movements with an intensity that bordered on feral. He didn't simply notice, he reacted. He didn't just intervene, he claimed. And Lyra felt the thread of possessiveness tighten around her chest like a slow-burning fire, both thrilling and suffocating. Despite herself, Lyra began to learn the rhythm of this dangerous world. Nights were not for rest, they were for survival. Alleyways held secrets, streets concealed threats, and the servants, silent and efficient, moved in ways she couldn't yet understand. And yet, in the midst of that tension, she found herself drawn to Zyric in ways that defied reason. There was a magnetism in him that made her stomach flutter, a pull in her chest that made her breath hitch when he was near, and a curiosity that refused to be quiet. She questioned everything, her instincts, her heart, the strange alignment of their fates, but the answers were as elusive as the shadows he seemed to command. Danger came in small bursts and large catastrophes alike. A fire broke out in a neighboring district, and Zyric appeared at her side before she realized she had been running. He guided her, protected her, but in the brief moments when their hands brushed or his gaze met hers, Lyra felt herself caught between fear and fascination, between trust and terror. Every heartbeat was a question. Could she rely on him, or was he the very danger she feared? Even as she struggled to navigate this world, she began to notice the subtler details. The way he lingered just beyond sight, watching over her without intrusion. The careful placement of allies and servants that protected her while leaving her free. The rare, fleeting moments when his expression softened, revealing the man behind the fearsome facade. It was maddening. It was magnetic. It made her pulse quicken even as she reminded herself that he was dangerous, that power and obsession often wore the same mask as protection. The nights were the worst. Silence settled over the town like a heavy fog, broken only by distant howls and the faint metallic whisper of claws on stone. Lyra would lie awake, heart pounding, replaying every glance, every touch, every word exchanged with Zyric. She felt a pull toward him she couldn't name, a hunger for understanding, for connection, for something she had never known. But alongside it was fear, a sharp, nagging awareness that nothing in this world was safe, and that her fascination could easily become a trap. And then there was the servant. Silent. Observant. Always present in the periphery of her vision. Lyra couldn't name why, but there was something unsettling about him. Not threatening, at least not directly, but intentional. His eyes followed her with quiet patience, noting, measuring, understanding more than she realized. And when he looked away, when he moved through the shadows with silent efficiency, she felt the weight of unseen forces pressing around her. In this world, trust was a luxury and she had none to spare. Yet despite the tension, despite the threat, despite the constant gnawing question of whether Zyric was friend or foe, there were moments that shimmered with impossible intimacy. A brush of hands as he handed her a cloak during a storm. A subtle glance that lingered too long in the candlelight of a council chamber. A low voice, quiet enough that only she could hear, "Stay close. I won't let anything take you." The words were both balm and chain, a comfort wrapped in possessive restraint, and Lyra felt herself responding in kind, drawn to him even as every rational thought screamed to step back. Celine of course noticed. She prowled, a predator cloaked in elegance, testing boundaries, stoking tension. Every confrontation left Lyra's heart hammering, every whispered warning from Zyric leaving her both reassured and alarmed. She began to understand the rules of this world. That power was exercised not just in battle, but in the gaze, the stance, the unspoken claim. And slowly, unwillingly, she felt herself being drawn into Zyric's orbit, caught between fascination and fear, trust and danger, love and survival. In the quiet moments between crises, she would wander the shadowed streets alone, feeling the weight of unseen eyes, the pulse of tension in every corner. And always, without fail, Zyric was there. Or close enough that she sensed his presence, felt the magnetism that refused to release her. She was learning that in his world, nothing was as it seemed, and every glance, every touch, every word carried a weight far greater than any ordinary human interaction. The night deepened, and with it came an unspoken understanding. This was only the beginning. Danger would come, power would clash, and hearts would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Lyra had stepped into a realm where trust was fragile, obsession was lethal, and every choice had consequences that could stretch beyond life itself. And through it all, she could not stop watching him, could not stop wondering, could not stop feeling the slow, inevitable pull of fascination and fear that tied her fate to Zyric, the feared and magnetic zombie Alpha King. Night fell like a velvet shroud over the town, swallowing streets in shadow and leaving only the faint glow of lanterns to guide the wary. Lyra walked carefully, every footstep echoing in the empty alleyways, each breath a reminder that in this world, nothing was safe. Yet it wasn't the darkness that made her heart pound, it was the thought of Zyric. He had grown more than a mere presence in her life. He was a constant, impossible force, magnetic and terrifying. She had glimpsed his obsession before in the lingering intensity of his gaze, the subtle possessiveness in his gestures, but tonight, that obsession seemed almost tangible, pressing down like a storm cloud just beyond sight. Her mind churned with questions she wasn't ready to answer. Who was he really? Behind the strength, the control, the undeniable authority, what pain did he carry? The rumors she had heard, the whispered tales of a curse, of a lost love that had fractured his soul, lingered in the corners of her thoughts. They spoke of a man who had been shaped by tragedy, whose power had been forged in heartbreak and betrayal. And yet, seeing him in quiet moments, in flashes when his mask slipped, she glimpsed vulnerability beneath the formidable exterior, and it both fascinated and frightened her. It was in the library of his ancient estate that the first real revelation struck. She had wandered there under the guise of curiosity, seeking the old texts and histories of his domain, when she stumbled upon a hidden chamber. The air inside was cold, tinged with incense and something darker, something alive in its stillness. There, amidst dusty tomes and scrolls, she discovered something no one had meant for her eyes. Maps of the undead territories, notes on weaknesses in his army, even diagrams of forbidden rituals. Her pulse quickened, not with excitement but with the icy brush of fear. She had discovered a secret that could topple kingdoms. And yet, as she traced the markings with trembling fingers, she couldn't shake the thought that Zyric had anticipated her finding it, that even here she was being observed, guided, tested. The tension escalated when Celine made her move. She appeared suddenly, a shadow coiling in the doorway, eyes gleaming with malice. "You don't belong here," she hissed, voice low and venomous. It wasn't just jealousy, it was calculation, a precision strike at Lyra's confidence and sense of place. Celine's hand flicked toward a hidden dagger, and for the first time, Lyra felt raw, tangible danger. The world seemed to slow, every heartbeat loud in her ears, every breath a struggle as instinct and fear collided. And then Zyric was there, emerging from the shadows with inhuman speed, a predator incarnate. The air around him seemed to vibrate with energy, his presence bending the room, the threat, the very gravity of the moment. His eyes locked on hers, and in that instant, every question she had ever had about trust and danger collided. He moved to intercept Celine, but it wasn't merely protection. His movements, the way he claimed space around her, the subtle brush of his hand against her shoulder as he stepped between them, carried a possessive intensity that made her breath hitch. She wanted to step back, to retreat, but instead she found herself leaning slightly into him, drawn by a force she couldn't name, even as fear screamed at her to run. Once Celine was gone, defeated more by fear of him than by force, Lyra felt the weight of the moment press down. She was shaken, but not by the physical danger alone. She was shaken by what she realized in Zyric's proximity. Obsession and protection, power and desire, all blended in ways she had never felt before. His gaze lingered, searching, assessing, claiming, and she had no way to escape it. For the first time she understood the precarious balance of attraction and dread that had been building between them, a thread that could snap at any moment and leave ruin in its wake. That night, alone in her room, The discovery of the hidden chamber and the confrontation with Selene replayed endlessly in her mind. She felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, the way the heart races when standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could be fatal. Trust, she realized, was no longer simple. Love was no longer simple. Even Zyric's protective presence was fraught with questions. Was it love? Was it ownership? Or was it something darker, a dangerous obsession that could consume her if she wasn't careful? Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft, almost imperceptible creak of the floor outside her door. A shadow moved in the moonlight and she froze. It wasn't Selene this time, it was the silent servant, the one who had watched her from the edges since her arrival. He paused, eyes glinting in the dim light as if measuring her, testing her. In that silent gaze she felt the weight of unseen forces at play, a reminder that in this world, danger and desire were often indistinguishable, and that survival meant learning to navigate both. The next days were a tense dance of observation and maneuvering. Every encounter with Zyric carried layers of unspoken questions. He offered protection, guidance, glimpses of warmth, but always with a tension that hinted at his own inner darkness. She watched him as he moved through his domain, commanding loyalty and fear with equal ease, and she began to understand that his obsession with her was not casual, not fleeting. It was an inescapable current, one that pulled her closer even as it threatened to drown her. Selene, relentless, continued to stir trouble, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, and Lyra began to see the world as a chessboard of dangers and desires. Every step, every word, every glance carried weight. Trust was a currency she could not afford to spend freely. And yet, in the midst of danger, she found herself thinking of Zyric, of the rare moments when his mask slipped and she glimpsed a man capable of tenderness, of humor, of connection. She wanted to believe in that man, wanted to see him as protector rather than predator, lover rather than owner. But the shadows of doubt were long and the whispers of betrayal were louder. The moral dilemmas came in small, sharp moments. Should she reveal the weaknesses she had discovered in Zyric's domain to potential allies? Or would that betray him? Could she trust her own instincts when every heartbeat seemed to belong to him? And beneath it all, a deeper question stirred. Was her attraction to him genuine, or was it the pull of danger, the thrill of being seen by a man who wielded absolute power? Even as she grappled with these questions, she felt herself changing. Fear was no longer just fear. It was focus, survival, instinct sharpened to a blade. Desire was no longer just desire. It was clarity, a recognition of the bond that tethered her to Zyric whether she wanted it or not. And through it all, the world around her shifted, dangerous, alive, and full of secrets waiting to explode. By the time she realized it, Lyra was no longer merely a visitor in Zyric's world. She was a participant in its power struggles, a target of its rivalries, and unknowingly, a catalyst for its dark revelations. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word between her and Zyric carried the weight of potential disaster, and she knew deep in her bones that nothing, love, trust, safety, or loyalty, would ever be simple again. The night had turned into a living nightmare. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the streets, twisting and quivering as if the darkness itself were alive. Lyra's heartbeat thundered in her chest, each beat a warning that danger was closer than she could see. She had sensed it for hours, the subtle disturbances, the quiet tension that whispered in the air around her. And now, as she crept along the narrow, cobbled streets, every instinct screamed that the storm she had feared was here. Then it struck, a sudden, violent ambush from the shadows. Figures moved with unnatural speed, striking from rooftops, from alleyways, and the corners of her vision. Selene, eyes blazing with triumph, led the attack, but she was not alone. Rival factions, undead sentinels, and rogue wolves descended upon her like a wave of malice and teeth. Lyra stumbled backward, chest heaving, silver eyes wide with terror, as claws and talons scraped dangerously close. The air smelled of blood, smoke, and ozone, sharp and choking. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to flee, but there was nowhere safe. Then a presence crashed into the fray, commanding attention with the force of a hurricane. Zyric emerged, all power and rage distilled into one impossibly tall figure, his eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator born to dominate, cutting through the attackers with supernatural precision. Lyra could only watch, frozen, as he became a whirlwind of motion and power. Each strike of his claws or flash of his teeth carried deadly intent, but not against her, against anything that dared threaten her. Her chest tightened as she realized something she had never allowed herself to see before. His obsession with her was not merely possessive, it was survival. She was the one thing that made him hesitate, the one soul that could penetrate the impenetrable fortress of his mind. She had thought it fear or desire or arrogance, but it was something deeper, something fierce and unrelenting. He would fight like hell to protect her, and yet, in the same breath, he would allow the world to tremble around them both. Lyra stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding a slash from Celine's dagger. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and for a moment she thought she would collapse from sheer terror. But then Zyric was there, between her and danger, and she felt the heat of his body, the strength of his presence, and the weight of a man who would stop at nothing to keep her alive. His gaze met hers, sharp and hungry, and in that instant she saw not just protection but raw, unfiltered obsession. Terrified her. And yet, beneath the fear, a thrill ran through her veins, wild and undeniable. "You shouldn't be here," he growled, low and dangerous, his voice carrying a warning and a promise all at once. "But now that you are, I will not let anything touch you." Lyra's eyes widened as he unleashed a roar that was both human and inhuman, a sound that made the air itself shiver. The energy around him seemed to crackle, bending reality in its intensity. She felt the pull of his power, the darkness and light entwined in one impossible being, and it was both terrifying and magnetic. He was a storm and she was standing in the eye, caught between awe and fear. The attack escalated. Celine and the rogue wolves pressed forward, desperate and furious, but Zyric met them with something more than strength. It was precision, strategy, and the deadly confidence of one who had survived centuries of battles, curses, and betrayals. Every movement was a statement. He was the apex predator, the ruler of this world, and no one would take what he considered his. Lyra watched, heart hammering, as the truth settled over her. He was not just obsessed with her because she fascinated him. She challenged him. She was the only one who had ever dared to see past the armor, past the curse, past the power that had made him untouchable. And that challenge was intoxicating. Amid the chaos, Lyra felt herself changing. The fear that had once paralyzed her transformed into clarity. She was no longer merely the observer. She was part of this storm, part of Zyric's world. Her instincts sharpened, and for the first time she felt the subtle echoes of her own power, a pulse of energy that responded to the peril around her. She did not yet understand its limits, but she knew she could not stand aside. Survival demanded action, and action demanded courage she had never thought she possessed. Then came the revelation. Amid the clash, Zyric's curse became undeniable. Shadows bent around him, spirits of the fallen whispering in the edges of the battlefield, and Lyra glimpsed the full weight of his power. He was not simply a formidable alpha. He was a man bound by a curse older than memory, chained by a history of betrayal and loss. And yet, even with all that darkness pressing on him, he had chosen her. Not because it was convenient, not because it was expected, but because she had forced him to confront himself, to confront the man he had tried so hard to hide. Celine lunged again, dagger aimed for Lyra's chest, and the servant, silent until now, revealed his hidden mastery. He intercepted, moving faster than the eye could follow, and in the brief chaos, Lyra realized that her world was larger than she had imagined. Every figure, every power, every allegiance mattered, and every choice would echo for years to come. As the night stretched on, every strike, every dodge, every near miss carved lessons into her mind. Trust could not be assumed. Desire could be deadly. And love itself, was a weapon that could heal or destroy with equal ferocity. By dawn, the battlefield was littered with silence, broken only by Zyric's quiet breathing and the faint groans of the injured. Lyra knelt amidst the ruin, chest heaving, body trembling as realization settled over her like a heavy cloak. She had survived. But she had also seen everything. The depth of Zyric's obsession, the extent of his power, the curses and burdens he carried. And she knew, as surely as she knew the rising sun would burn away the night, that nothing would ever be the same. In that moment, Lyra understood the precarious edge upon which they balanced. They were bound not just by attraction, not just by desire, but by survival, power, and the fragile thread of trust. The stakes had been revealed, raw and terrifying. And somewhere deep in her chest, amidst fear and awe and an impossible thrill, she felt the first glimmer of understanding. This bond, this connection with Zyric was not a choice, it was destiny. And destiny, as she now knew, demanded courage, sacrifice, and an unflinching willingness to face darkness together. The final whisper of wind carried a warning through the ruined streets. The world was not done with them. Rivals would return, secrets would unravel, and the threads of love and power would be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet aftermath, Lyra and Zyric stood, bruised but unbroken, bound together by fire, shadow, and the inescapable pull of their entwined fates. The dust of battle settled slowly, as if the night itself were exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Lyra's knees were weak, her chest heaving with ragged breaths, and every muscle in her body screamed with the memory of claws, teeth, and danger narrowly avoided. She had survived, barely, but survival alone did not erase the tremor in her soul. The way fear and awe and the raw intensity of Zyric's power still clung to her like a second skin. Zyric stepped closer, his presence so overpowering that the air seemed to hum around him. The shadows of the battlefield stretched and recoiled as he moved, and his eyes, glowing faintly like embers caught in twilight, never left her. There was no need for words. His body language, taut and predatory, spoke volumes. The obsession that had once unnerved her had transformed into something more, something undeniable, something protective. His devotion was no longer merely possessive. It had sharpened into an unyielding promise. She would not be harmed again while he drew breath. Lyra's heart thumped violently, an erratic drum echoing the conflicting emotions surging within her. Relief, awe, fear, longing, and a thrill she could barely name all collided. She could see the contours of the man behind the myth, the Alpha King who had been cursed, feared, and hardened beyond comprehension, yet who now bared his loyalty in ways the world could not comprehend. He had always been powerful, always dangerous, but here now in the quiet aftermath he was also hers. Not claimed as an object but as a protector, a companion, a storm-wrapped promise. For a long moment they simply regarded one another. Words were unnecessary. His gaze held centuries of pain, regret, and longing, tempered by a ferocity that promised no one would ever hurt her again. Lyra felt the subtle tremor in her chest, that mingling of fear and desire, and realized she was teetering on the edge of a precipice, emotional, spiritual, and physical. Loving him meant surrendering to the storm entirely, letting herself be swept away by something greater than either of them. Lyra, his voice was low, a rumble that could have shaken the stones beneath their feet, but there was a tenderness buried deep within the growl. You are mine to protect. Nothing, no one, will ever stand in my way again. The words reverberated through her, both thrilling and terrifying. She knew him, had glimpsed the darkness behind those amber eyes, felt the weight of his curse and the fire of his obsession, but she also saw a different man emerging. One willing to temper his dominance with care, to wield his power not as a weapon against her but as a shield. It was a delicate balance, fragile and trembling like a blade on the edge of dawn. As the realization sank in, Lyra allowed herself a measure of surrender. Her body relaxed against the cold stones, against the jagged remnants of the battle, and she let her hands brush against his forearm, feeling the heat of his skin beneath the taut muscles, the living pulse of strength and promise. For the first time she did not flinch from it. He did not fear it. She felt only a strange, dizzying combination of comfort and exhilaration, as though being this close to him could simultaneously protect and consume her. In the quiet that followed, the rivals had either fled or been neutralized. Celine's fury had been quelled, her schemes dismantled, leaving a tenuous calm over the realm. But peace, Lyra knew, was always fragile in a world dominated by power, ambition, and the supernatural. Still, in that moment she allowed herself to believe it. Believe that for now at least she could breathe without fear, walk without looking over her shoulder, and consider the strange, dangerous, and intoxicating possibility of love. Zyric moved closer, hand brushing a strand of hair from her face, eyes searching hers for permission, for a sign that she would accept the closeness, the bond, the unspoken pledge between them. Lyra felt her pulse spike, warmth flooding her cheeks and a shiver tracing her spine. She began, then faltered, words tangled with emotion she could not yet name. He smiled then, not the dangerous, predatory smile she had feared, but something softer, almost human. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured, and it was enough. It was enough because the truth of their connection needed no words, because the shared terror, the shared survival had already spoken volumes. Lyra's hand lifted tentatively, brushing against his chest, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the skin. Her voice caught, trembling with vulnerability. "I think I've been waiting for this. For you, for someone like you, for someone who—" Her words trailed into silence, but the meaning was clear. She had been waiting, unconsciously, for someone fierce enough to protect her and patient enough to let her be herself. Someone who could love her without breaking her. Zyric's fingers curled around hers, rough and warm, grounding her in a world that had been chaotic and unpredictable for far too long. "Then you will have it," he whispered, a quiet vow, a promise carved into the night, into the world, into the very fibers of their fates. "All of it. If you'll let me." And she did. She let him. It was not an immediate, perfect surrender, but it was real. A measured, trembling, irrevocable surrender of heart and spirit. She allowed herself to trust him, even knowing the danger inherent in loving a creature as formidable, as haunted, as powerful as Zyric. She allowed herself to see beyond the obsession to the man he could be, the partner he could become, the protector she needed. As the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, casting silver light across the shattered city, they stood together, hands intertwined, hearts synchronizing with a fragile yet unbreakable rhythm. The threat was not gone, never gone, but the knowledge that they faced it together imbued them both with an unprecedented strength. Love, they realized, was as dangerous as any curse, as exhilarating as any battle, and as consuming as any power that might seek to divide them. Lyra breathed in, chest rising and falling, and allowed herself to hope. To truly hope. Zyric, once a symbol of fear, had transformed in her eyes into something else. A guardian, a partner, a king whose obsession had become devotion, whose darkness could now protect instead of dominate. And as they stood in that quiet aftermath, the world holding its breath with them, Lyra understood something fundamental. Survival had brought them together, but love, real, dangerous, breathtaking love, would bind them, and nothing would ever be the same again. Yet even in that fragile moment of triumph, a whisper of warning lingered in the wind. The world was not done with them. Shadows still moved beyond the light, secrets still festered, and power was never truly safe. But for now, for this fleeting, exquisite moment, Lyra and Zyric were together. And together they were unstoppable. The dawn painted the world in muted gold, soft and deceptive after a night carved from chaos and blood. Lyra stood close to Zyric, hand in his, feeling the pulse of his strength beneath her fingers, and yet even in that rare stillness, the air seemed to hum with warning. The shadows between the ruins of the city didn't merely recede, they lingered, coiling like restless spirits, whispering secrets the daylight could not banish. Zyric's amber eyes scanned the horizon, sharp, unblinking, alive with a predator's intuition. He knew, as she did not yet, that the victory of the night was only temporary. Celine's fury, the rival clans, the unseen forces that prowled beyond their awareness, they would not simply vanish. Some threats could wait, stalking silently, biding their time, learning, growing. And others were patient because they were immortal. Lyra's heart skipped, a cold spike of apprehension threading through the warmth of her newfound trust. She squeezed his hand instinctively, searching for reassurance, for proof that the bond they had forged in fire and terror could withstand what was coming. "Zyric, will it ever end?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. He turned toward her, jaw set, the golden light catching the edges of his sharp features, and for a moment he did not answer. His hand rose, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle but deliberate. "It never ends," he said finally, voice low and steady, heavy with truth. "The world we inhabit, it will never stop testing us. But what matters," he continued, gaze locking with hers, unwavering, magnetic, "is that we face it together. Whatever comes, whatever hunts us, we are united." Lyra's chest swelled with an odd mixture of relief and dread. United. Yes, but at what cost? Her pulse raced with the memory of the night's chaos, the scent of blood, the metallic taste of fear, the sensation of being on the edge of death, only to be claimed and protected by a force far beyond her understanding. Could she ever truly be safe? Could she ever fully trust the world again? The questions lingered like smoke, curling into the spaces between them. And then, as if on cue, a subtle tremor rattled the ground beneath their feet. Small, almost imperceptible, yet enough to make Lyra's stomach clench. She felt it in her bones, a resonance that didn't belong to the ruins or the morning wind. Something ancient, something powerful was stirring. The calm, the fragile victory, they were illusions, thin and fleeting, masking the storm that had only just begun. Zyric stiffened, senses sharpening, muscles coiling like spring-loaded steel beneath his skin. "You feel it too," he said, a faint growl threading through his words, though his voice remained composed, controlled. "The world hasn't finished with us. Not yet. There are those who would see us fall, see you broken, see me, tested beyond endurance." Lyra's breath caught. She had survived betrayal, near death, and the terrifying revelation of Zyric's obsession, but this, the sense of a threat lurking just beyond perception, was something else entirely. It was the knowledge that power never rests, that danger never sleeps, and that the choices they had made tonight, the bond they had forged in fire and blood, would not shield them forever. Her fingers tightened around his. "Then we fight," she whispered, not as a question but as a vow. "Together." Zyric's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, the predatory edge softening just enough for her to see the man beneath the legend. The Lycan king, cursed, powerful, haunted, and yet entirely devoted to her. "Together," he agreed, and the word echoed like a promise through the still, fragile dawn. And in that moment, as the light stretched across the ruins and the wind carried faint whispers from unseen corners, a shadow moved in the distance, deliberate, silent, and patient. A presence that did not belong to this world, a power older than either of them, watching, waiting, calculating. Lyra shivered, sensing instinctively that their story was far from over. There would be more battles, more betrayals, and more tests of trust and love. But she also understood something fundamental. Whatever came, they would meet it side by side. The storm was only beginning, and the fire of their bond would be the only shield that could endure. And so the sun rose, casting long, haunting shadows across the ruins, a reminder that even in light, darkness waits. And far beyond the horizon, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the moment to strike. Would Lyra survive what was coming? Would Zyric's devotion remain unshakable? Or would the forces aligned against them succeed in tearing apart the fragile love they had forged in fire, blood, and obsession? The answers were not yet written. But one thing was certain: their story was far from over. And every heartbeat, every choice, every stolen moment of trust and passion would matter. If this story stirred your heart, subscribe to Anne's Romance Collections. Here, love is dangerous, destiny is relentless, and every tale will grip you until the very last heartbeat. Stay with us, because the next chapter is coming, and you won't want to miss what fate has in store for Lyra and Zyric.